Hello? 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 Yeah, you can use this one if you'd like. It's just yeah. the one is right here and it's connected.
received the best dissertation.
I didn't finish. Yeah.
And she continued to work as a therapist. She had years and included research has concentrated on high-risk parenting environments, including the role of prenatal care,
Thank you, Janet. I will see if this mic works well for me. Okay. I'm really glad to be here, and I will be talking today about our Finnish longitudinal research project, which was about the role of mother's prenatal substance use disorder, early parenting, and their effects on child development at school age. And this was the project where I worked in the early phases of that longitudinal study as part of my doctoral dissertation. And I was a co-PI in the school age phase of the study. Here are some of our earlier articles related to this study, if somebody's interested. And in this, we have, for example, looked at effectiveness of interventions for mothers who had prenatal drug use disorder. So basically, our sample consisted of very high-risk mothers, most of whom used drugs intravenously, and they received these integrated types of intensive interventions starting during pregnancy, including components of therapeutic help, to support parenting, so that infants were also involved in the interventions after they were born, and also substance use treatment and other types of multimodal treatments. These people usually need a lot of help also in practical issues such as living arrangements or economical things. And my special interest in my doctoral dissertation was the role of prenatal representations for later parent-child relationships in high-risk mothers and fathers, and these are also things that we've been looking at in the earlier phases of the study. But with the longitudinal design, we had an opportunity to kind of trying to understand more about the processes that may explain or be a small part of the what we know happens often in these families, that is intergenerational transmission of substance use and mental health problems to the next generation. And why is maternal prenatal drug use disorder a risk factor? I wanted to start my presentation with going into more detail about this, because what we initially, most of us initially think is, of course, that there's prenatal exposure to substances, which may explain later developmental problems for the children. And that is, of course, true. Depending on the exact doses and timings and the combination of substances used, there may be permanent effects of substances on child development. This is not a comprehensive list, and I will not go through everything, but just some examples. The mothers in our sample, in what is common in Finland in drug users, they were polysubstance users. So almost everybody uses many different types of substances, the most common ones being opiates and amphetamine in Finland, and alcohol also. And we have much less cocaine use than in the US. And cannabis is also common. And I would say that every mother in the sample would also, in our sample, probably also smoked during pregnancy. And the most common effects that substances have on child development include prematurity, low birth weight, and problems related to regulation of attention and emotions. Some substances, such as opiates, may also lead to withdrawal symptoms for the children, and especially alcohol is known to have more pervasive effects on mental retardation in various areas, and some substances may also lead to physical health issues. I would like to note that these children are not exposed only to substances during pregnancy, but also to prenatal stress very often. Substance use is a very highly stress-related disorder. We know that stress often leads to relapses in substance use, and trying to withdraw from substances increases stress. The mothers in our sample mostly try to withdraw from substance use after pregnancy recognition, which often comes late, for example, second trimester. And there is a lot of research about fetal programming effects of mothers' prenatal stress on child development. Actually, the effects often are also especially important for attention and emotion regulation, just like the effects of substances. To make it less simple, many substance use researchers agree that actually the psychosocial risk associated with prenatal substance use may actually have more effect on child development than exposure itself. Many of the substance using mothers also have, or even most of them also have, comorbid mental health problems, including often even serious conditions such as psychotic disorders or personal disorders, and also depression, anxiety, trauma symptoms. Often there are high levels of socioeconomic risk factors. People live in poverty, have low educational level, no job, and they're often single parents or in a relationship with another substance user. In general, they have very low support networks. The mothers in our study who participated in therapy were later described by our therapist that many of them said that they don't meet any other people during the week except the therapy group. That is because it could be that most of their previous friends were substance users, and if you're trying to withdraw, you have to kind of cut contact to those circles. And what is perhaps most important for parenting is the fact that they often come from very traumatic own attachment histories. They have high incidences of maltreatment in substance use by their own parents in the history, as well as experiences of adulthood violence exposure, such as intimate partner violence. And they often have very insecure or disorganized attachments themselves. So it's no surprise that these problems often lead to harsh or neglectful parenting with their own children. In our previous studies, we looked at the emotional availability between these mothers and their infants, and both the mothers and the infants had global deficits in their emotional availability towards each other, present both in decreased sensitivity and responsiveness, but also in the ability to control negative emotions, in being hostile and intrusive towards their infants. And to add a little bit more complexity, because of the exposure, the infants also have their own innate difficulties that they bring to the interactive relationship to their vulnerable mothers. They may be more difficult to soothe, and also maybe more withdrawn, more difficult to get into contact. And often these mutual problems lead to vicious circles, exacerbate each other. And what we're interested in this study are kind of trying to understand some of the developmental underlying mechanisms or important things in middle childhood development in cognitive and social emotional capacities that could be important for later substance use or mental health disorders. And what we are looking at in this study, and what I will be describing about our results are related to children's self-regulation, including executive functioning and emotional regulation, social cognition, consisting of facial emotion recognition and mentalization, attachment, especially attachment disorganization. And we're also looking at the mental problems and especially dissociation in these children. I will briefly go through these main concepts, although I know that many of you are very familiar with them. So executive functioning is kind of the cognitive aspect of self-regulation, meaning the top-down cognitive regulatory processes that underlie goal-directed actions. We are interested here both in the core executive functioning, inhibition, cognitive flexibility of shifting, and working memory, and then also the more higher level processes such as planning and organizing. And we have been using both a maternal report as well as direct testing children. And we are also looking at emotion regulation, defined as conscious or unconscious processes to control duration, intensity, and expression of emotional reactions. And we were interested in both dysregulation, hyperregulation difficulties in these processes, such as, for example, slamming doors or shouting, and also the use of constructive regulation, which we call coping here, for which is a category of constructive strategies such as seeking social support or trying to find a more positive perspective for looking at the things. And we also looked at emotional suppression. It's interesting because both substance use and mental health problems are usually associated with problems in both of these areas. And these are also areas that we know that early parenting environment may affect them greatly. But we're interested in what could the joint effects of exposure and early parenting have for their development in male childhood. Then my special interest is also in social cognition, which is important in all our human relationships, to be able to understand other people's emotions, thoughts, intentions that underlie their behaviors, and kind of what we need to be able to function socially. We are looking here the basic ability to recognize emotions from visual cues, as well as more complex mentalization, which means kind of the ability to try to understand what kind of intentions, beliefs, emotions, cognition may underline other people's and one's own behavior and how they affect each other. And social cognition is also very interesting because we have a lot of knowledge that these processes are disturbed in substance use and mental health disorders. But however, the children of substance using mothers have not actually been studied in terms of their social cognition. Attachment, probably all of you are familiar with attachment. Just to remind you that it refers to our automatic interpersonal models of safety of close relationships, and is the basics of it are formed in early relationships with our primary caregivers, where we learn how we under threat or stress, how can we achieve security, or can we do that, forming mental representations about whether we can trust other people or ourselves, if we are worthy of getting support, and if we can really, if the world is predictable place. And in infants and toddlers of substance using mothers, there has been previous research about their attachment styles, and researchers found that this organized attachment style is most typical for these children. Disorganized attachment is a very specific style, different from kind of regular insecurity. If you are insecurely attached, but in an organized way, you can be anxiously or avoidantly attached. You are not able to trust that other people help you when you are distressed, but you know what you can do. You have some organized thing how you can do. For example, you can act self-reliant, or you can express your emotions very strongly. But when you're disorganized, it actually means that you're growing up in an environment which is where the caregiver is actually also the source of distress. So this creates an irresolvable paradox for a child, kind of nowhere to go, because when their attachment is activated by stress, which would normally lead a child to approach the caregiver, but since the same person may also be the cause of distress, or at least is not able to help regulate distress, the child literally has no one to turn to. And at school age, there may be more advanced strategies to handle this organization. These children at school age, they may be, for example, role reversing. They may try to take care of their caregivers, or they may manipulate and be controlling towards their caregivers. But they may also be completely chaotic and disorganized, and there are also dissociative behaviors typical for these children, which we are also looking at in the study. So previous studies have shown that this group of children has an increased risk for both internalizing and externalizing symptoms. But there aren't previous studies about their trauma-related symptoms. And we know that dissociation, which dissociation actually means that in relation to an overwhelmingly traumatic experience, your mind can kind of do this ultimate protective strategy where these overwhelming events are recoded into a separate memory system, which is not part of your life narrative. That can help you function in your daily life when you are not all the time thinking about those experiences. You don't actually even have access to them, or at least to the emotions that are associated with them. But the problem with dissociation is that your memory kind of doesn't know that the event has ended, because it's not integrated to your timeline of your normal memory. So, for example, outside events may trigger dissociated memories. For example, in our sample, the therapist described that the mother, one of the mothers said that when her infant pulled her hair, in her mind she went back to her childhood abuse experiences and wasn't really in that time and place, and more examined more. And for a while, she experienced the infant as kind of her childhood perpetrator. So that's why these are harmful processes, even though they are helpful in the beginning and necessary for survival in situations where you cannot really do anything else. And dissociation is typical for adults and adolescents who have substance use disorder. Not surprising, because they are highly traumatized people, and they are also known to be associated with like trauma and addiction severity. But as I said, there is no previous research on children. Finally, we were interested whether early positive parenting or a positive mother-infant relationship could counteract the effects of prenatal substance use disorder. And there are longitudinal studies showing that early parenting quality is actually the most salient early childhood predictor of later socio-emotional development, showing protective effects even until adulthood. And there are a couple of previous studies in substance using populations showing that substance exposure may lead to negative developmental effects in social development only in conjunction with harsh parenting. So we wanted to look at also the role of early parenting. And here are our research questions. So do children of mothers with prenatal substance use disorder differ from comparison children at school age in their self-regulation, social cognition, attachment, and mental health, especially dissociation? And whether good early parenting quality predicts a better self-regulation, social cognition, attachment, and mental health despite mother's substance use disorder. And here's our research design. I will first say that this is also an interesting, you will learn here also how difficult it is actually to do research on such high-risk populations. I will tell you more about that. And this is a common experience shared by all people who do this type of research. Our sample consisted of 51 mothers with prenatal drug use disorder, so they had a diagnosis of that, and about 80% used drugs intravenously. So they were really heavy abusers, and we had 50 control or comparison mothers who had never had a substance misuse. They had pregnancy complications, so they're a medical high-risk group. Some of them with even very severe medical pregnancy complications, and actually they had more complications in their pregnancy than the substance use group. And there has never been any differences in children's health between those two groups, probably because these control children were also medical risk children, but they had less psychosocial risks. The comparison group mothers were more often married and they had higher socioeconomic status. And for example, when the children were 4 and 12 months, we measured the dyadic emotional availability with emotional availability scales, where we videotaped observed interaction, and we used an average composite scale to indicate kind of the global quality of interaction during the first year in this study. And when the children were at school age, we recontacted these mothers, which was harder than one would imagine, because many of them were actually dead or without a permanent address. There is a national population registry in Finland, so you can usually access or you can usually get contact with previous participants, but it was very difficult. And just a lot of other surprising things also happened. For example, it wasn't uncommon that we would talk to somebody and she would agree to participate, but then she would be hospitalized for psychosis. So it was an interesting recruitment process in itself. So we were able to get 20 of the mothers in the substitute group to the study. And for children also had their foster mothers in the study. So we contacted biological mothers, and if they gave permission, we also asked the foster mothers to participate. Yeah, and there were also 2 other foster children who participated just with their biological mother, and then 31 comparison children. And we had, despite the high dropout, the dropout was not associated with any background factors. We don't actually know if the mothers who participated, if they were like more high risk or less high risk than the original participants in that sense, or similar, because in many of our therapists, they still keep in contact with some of the mothers, and people like unofficially told them that, well, I don't want to participate anymore because I'm doing well, this is not part of my life anymore. So there were also these reasons for not participating. And we looked at children's executive functioning with a brief, which is a parental report measure, and then children's own working memory was tested with Wechsler's DigiSpan, and with an inhibition was tested with go no go. So go no as a computer-based task. In that task, we asked the child to press a button when they see Donald Duck and to do nothing when they see Uncle Scrooge. And in the middle, the instruction switch, so they were supposed to react to Uncle Scrooge instead. So inhibition is a very important ability, for example, at school, when you need to concentrate on the relevant stimuli and ignore the irrelevant things. Child emotion regulation was measured with child emotion management skills, which both the child and the parent and possibly foster mother filled. And mentalization was measured with levels of emotional awareness skills for children, which consist of short awareness of social situations, and the children are told to, they're asked, what would you feel in that situation, and what would the other person feel in that situation? And we code it based on the complexity of the emotional understanding. And we use DANWA to assess emotion recognition. This is a computer-based task where the child is told to recognize whether the face they see on the computer screen, whether it's sad, angry, happy, or fearful. And some of the stimuli are like more low intensity, more difficult to understand. Attachment was measured with StoryStem for school age version developed by Catherine Kearns, which, well, many of you may know StoryStem measures, but they are role play measures where the child is given a beginning of a story, which is an attachment activating situation such as separation or a social problematic situation, and they are told to continue the story with dolls that represent themselves and their mother. And finally, we measured child mental health with a strengths and difficulties questionnaire and dissociation with a child dissociative checklist. And some things about the sample that slightly more than half of the mothers still reported substance misuse. This was based on self-report only, mostly alcohol use, about clinical cutoff, but some also reported illegal substance use. And about half the children had at some point been in foster care. So I will shortly present all of our results. So when we looked at child executive functioning, first there seemed to be differences between the comparison and substitutes group in the two indices of brief. So behavioral regulation index consists of inhibition, shifting, and emotional control, and metacognition indexes consist of working memory and these more higher level abilities. But when we control for socioeconomic risk, actually only the results related to behavioral regulation index remained significant. And also there was difference in child inhibition tested directly from the child with go-no-go task, and which remained after controlling for socioeconomic risk. We used the summary variable consisting of the kind of the amount of risks they had. And in parenting quality, was not associated with any of the children's executive functioning factors at school age. When we looked at emotion regulation, there were initially group differences in children's dysregulation. So the substitute group showed more dysregulation, and they also had lower constructive coping, lower constructive abilities to regulate their emotions. Interestingly, when we added early parenting to the model, it was only the parenting, but not substance use disorder, that predicted children's emotion dysregulation, which is not so surprising because these abilities, like theoretically, they develop in the early co-regulatory relationships between the mother and the infant. Then when we looked at just the group differences in the two types of social cognition, we were first surprised that there were not as global differences as we had expected. There were some small differences. Substance use group children had lower other abilities in other directed mentalization, but not in self-directed mentalization, and they had more problems in fear recognition. But actually, when we added early emotional availability and parenting to the model, it was clear that it was very important for the development of this basic emotion recognition. It was associated with very globally with emotion recognition, so that those with good early emotional availability, those children had better, despite the substance group status, so they had better abilities to recognize emotions, and especially it was related to the more complex aspects of recognition, for abilities to recognize low intensity emotions and more developmentally complex emotions of fear and sadness, which are harder to recognize than happiness and anger, which, for example, people with brain damage or who are under the influence of substances can more easily identify anger and happiness. But early parenting was not associated with mentalization. This was kind of puzzling, but we thought that it may be due to the fact that actually these basic emotion recognition abilities, they develop relatively early. So at the end of the first year, which was also the time that we had our parenting measure, is also the time when infants' abilities to recognize emotions are they are nearly adult level already, whereas mentalization abilities are not built until a preschool age. And we did not look at later parenting here. So it may simply be that these early developing abilities are more affected by parenting. Also, it's interesting how much the exposure may actually affect in mentalization. Quite unsurprisingly, but sadly, the children in substance use group, 65% of them had disorganized attachment at school age. So it was pretty similar than the results from infancy and toddlerhood earlier on. Early parenting did not explain this. It may be more later life cumulative risks or adversities, which are very common in these children, or the parenting quality may also be more variable. Finally, when we looked at mental health, as expected, substance use group children had more internalizing and externalizing symptoms. Actually, almost 40% of them had symptoms over clinical cutoff in SDQ. And they also showed more dissociative symptoms, but when we controlled for socioeconomic risks and parenting, actually only socioeconomic risk and parenting predicted dissociative symptoms, but the group status itself did not do that. And a fourth of children had dissociative symptoms above clinical cutoff, as reported by their mother. And none of the comparison group children had any clinical symptoms in either of those measures. To sum things up, our small pilot study showed that mother's prenatal substance use disorder was associated with more problems in children's self-regulation, social cognition, attachment, and mental health school age. But early parenting seemed to be important as well, especially on emotion dysregulation, emotional recognition, and child dissociation. And we have to notice that these families were ones who participated in intensive early interventions that lasted about a year. And in our study, actually, the intervention was at least somewhat effective in improving the mother-infant interaction quality. And so, despite this very intensive help that they received, the children's outcomes were actually pretty depressing, and there would clearly be more need for later life interventions for these families as well, maybe more for interval types of interventions that could help these families to face new developmental phases that children are at, or to face those cumulative adversities that they often face. And their children's needs to be taken into account and kept in mind due to both exposure as well as probably all the psychosocial problems in the environment. The children themselves have problems in the self-regulation and social cognitive processes, as well as high incidences of attachment disorganization and trauma-related symptoms already in middle childhood, which are important risk factors for later development of psychopathology and substance use. And our study was clearly limited due to a small sample size and high dropout. And we are aware that our results are preliminary, even though there were some relatively high effect sizes despite of that. And we did a very simple analysis to keep adequate power. So it would be very important to have later larger sample studies that could actually look at mediators to really test for this type of mediated model that I showed in the beginning, and also to be able to fully use moderators in the model. Okay, and we still have some time for questions if you want to ask something or comment. Thank you.
Analysis.
I'm sorry, I don't hear well.
Do you have any analysis of subjects
the dropout analysis? Yeah. We looked at whether the dropout was associated with the socioeconomic variables like educational level or economical problems or unemployment, previous substance use amounts or previous mother-infant interaction quality, but they were not associated with those. I would be careful because it's a small sample. Maybe they just don't show, but it was not associated with anything else except the group status.
Apropos of the presentation,
Yeah.
do you have any indication early childhood
In our sample, yes, we have looked at their attachments with adult attachment interview, and I don't remember the exact percentages, but I think like nearly all of them were insecurely attached, and there was a very high rate of unresolved attachment in their own histories, and also like qualitatively, it was I did reliability to that AA coding. It was a very hard sample to code because even those that we rated as secure, I don't think they were really secure. They just were so strange that it couldn't be coded with that system. But yes, and also like we qualitatively know a lot about their. It's unfortunate that we haven't asked about the trauma history in the beginning. We have asked something about the children's cumulative trauma history. I didn't present that because there wasn't a time, but we did ask about their own trauma history. But I have also coded their mentalization interviews, the pregnancy interviews during pregnancy, and their parent development interviews, where they tell a lot about their own traumatic histories, how it affects their parenting. Yeah.
One final question. General needs. What about you? Where do you
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So I will be. I will be going back to Finland in July. So what I would really most want to do, I would actually like to find a teacher position at university. So I'm kind of looking for that kind of jobs, but I have fundings I'm working with like outside fundings when I go back if I don't find something. So I have, we are doing a couple of other studies a bit related to this one. One is among, we are just, it hasn't started yet, but it's among, because there's inpatient care for these mothers in Finland, which is very systematic and good quality. And we are doing research, including all the units in Finland that offer inpatient care for these substituting mothers during pregnancy. And we are looking at and in that one, we are definitely including the trauma aspect more, looking at how the treatment affects their children's development and parenting and the mother's own emotional regulation and that kind of things. And I'm also collecting my plans are really like about very like naturalistic studies, so kind of pre-existing interventions. The other thing that we are looking at is parent-infant interventions in communal treatment centers in Finland. There are actually very high-level or centers offering intensive treatments, long-term treatments for families who have like problems in their parenthood or worries about that during pregnancy or the first year, and we have like in the capital region of Finland, we have involved all these units and are also looking at the same kind of things. So we kind of want to know what is already done in Finland. They are not our cities, but we want to know kind of what do the existing services actually already do to these families that usually those families in the latter one, they have parents have mental health problems already during pregnancy. Mark? Sorry? Yeah.
for moms who have symptoms for pregnancy, and they stay at this program for their pregnancy, and stay another year after
Yeah.
their child is 1 year of age, or they can stay. So I really recommend.
I would love to talk. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you so much. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, we actually looked at children's hair cortisol levels in the study, but we didn't find anything, so I didn't report that. But I'm really interested in those biological aspects as well. So I would really love to thank you so much, Marjo. Okay. I think like with our very small sample, we cannot say for sure that there are like indications, of course, that it would, and from previous studies that have control for a lot of like larger samples that can control for socioeconomic risks. So I would say that, and also in our study, I think some of the things supported those findings. For example, that for attention problems, there was very clear effect, and it wasn't affected by parenting or socioeconomic risks. So that kind of suggests along the lines of larger previous studies that attentional processes are probably affected by that. I'm also thinking about social cognition. Nobody else has, to my knowledge, or I haven't found anybody who would have looked at like mentalization, but it is well possible that some brain areas that are relevant for mentalization, that they are actually like affected by substance use. So this is something that I would really, my article is under review, but we kind of really recommend that it would be important to look at in terms of mentalization, also that how much would actually like if we would measure the exposure really well, that how does it really affect the brain areas relevant for social cognition, because I would feel that probably is something worth looking at. Yeah, but not much is known yet, because it's very difficult, because there are so many other factors as well. Mm-hmm. Yes, yes, yes. I'm not a brain researcher, so I would need to say that I would actually be really interested in looking at the animal literature, because I couldn't find like in the human literature, but I have to say that I don't know, but it's possible, and I will definitely look at that. Thank you. Yeah. And I felt that was kind of like one of the most important outcomes here. And there would be more need to look at those neurodevelopmental effects. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. John, yours is probably still here. Yours?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
lot of